All right, looks like the attendee numbers have steadied, so we're all set to begin, Jacqueline.
All right. Good evening. My name is Jacqueline. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a student in the School of Disability Studies. Just to provide a physical description, I'm a white woman. I have brown hair and brown eyes. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and to welcome you to the BioCurious Artist Panel. Before we begin, I'm going to provide some access notes. So today's event will be accessible through the Zoom link, with some of us gathered here on the TMU campus and others joining us online from across Canada and beyond. We invite you to join and engage with the panel in whatever way that is most comfortable for you. We have two ASL interpreters, Lisa and Daniel. The interpreters' videos will be pinned. Live captioning is provided by Angie. Please select the CC closed captioning button on your Zoom menu bar in order to see the captions. If you are running into technical trouble, please contact Luke Nader through the chat function. Please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any other questions or concerns regarding your ability to access this panel. We will do our best to work with you to make sure we can help meet your needs. We would also like to remind you that this event is being recorded. We'd like to officially open tonight's panel with Toronto Metropolitan University's land acknowledgement. So, the School of Disability Studies at TMU is located in the city currently called Toronto. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Land acknowledgements are an opportunity to recognize Indigenous history and presence in the land in which we currently work and live. So I will be moderating the event this evening. We are students from the DST 614 Disability and Technology course, which is a work integrated learning course, where our class has been working with the Art Windsor-Essex, a public art gallery in Windsor, Ontario, on their BioCurious exhibition. The BioCurious exhibit at the AWE emphasizes the evolving relationship between humans and the land, originating with reflections on the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting in a narrative that outlines the changing landscape of the human body as technology continues to advance. As a group, we are hosting a panel discussion featuring Carmen Pappalia, Pree, Rehal, Max Ferguson, and Ezra Benus. Rather than responding to the works in the exhibition directly, the panel will explore the themes of the exhibition more broadly, bringing in interdisciplinary disability justice perspectives on the relationship between art, the body, and the land. Now I'll just provide some quick biographical introductions for the artists who are participating today. So born in 1981, Carmen Pappalia is a non-visual social practice artist with chronic and episodic pain. He uses organizing strategies and improvisation to address his access to public space, art institutions, and visual culture. As a convener, he establishes welcoming spaces where disabled, sick, and chronically ill people can build capacity for care that they lack on account of government failure and medical ableism. His work, which takes forms ranging from collaborative performance to public intervention, is a response to the harms of the medical model of disability. Pree, they, them, is an interdisciplinary artist based in Toronto by way of Georgia with Punjabi ancestry. Their art style is inspired by community care, cultural heritage, and storybook illustrations. Pree's creative alias is at Sticky Mangoes. Their art has been featured in Luminato Arts Festival, Design TO Festival, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Their shop has been featured in CBC, Extra Magazine, and Blog TO. Pree is the creator of Crip Collab and Digisign, both of which create paid opportunities for artists who belong to disabled, racialized, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities. Max, he, they, is an interdisciplinary artist, curator, and scholar. Currently, he is completing his PhD in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at York University. The research focuses on anti-colonial approaches to transness and disability, medicalization, madness, neoliberalism, and necropolitics. An artist since 1966, Max, Sarah, received their BFA from the University of Regina in 2001. They graduated with an MFA in interdisciplinary studies in 2017. His artistic explorations involve atypical and trans queer sexualities, activism, the body, surrealism, anti-colonial approaches to art making, and psychoanalysis. Currently, their work revolves around hybridized notions of photography, sculpture, installation, and performance, and involves psychoanalysis, the body, activism, queer trans theory, madness, and neurodivergent ways of being. Ezra's practice is cradled by embedded Jewishness, queerness, and sickness as purviews and navigational tools in this world. They are an artist, educator, and curator raised and still based in Brooklyn, whose multimedia practice concerns constructions of values of normativity, relationships, and intimacies of power, care, pain, and pleasure. Ezra is also one half of Brothers Sick, a sibling artistic collaboration on disability justice, illness, spirituality, and care. Commissioned published works include Blackwood Gallery's SDUK, Lingering, and The Kingdom of the Ill, reader published by Hatje Kans Verlag. The full artist bios are available at a Google Doc that we have, which we can share with you. So this concludes our artist biographies. So we can jump right into questions for the sake of time. So question number 1, which our panelists can respond to. The BioCurious exhibit emphasizes an ever-changing landscape of the human body with respect to technological development. While the exhibit originated with a discussion around the COVID-19 pandemic, do you see places for historical commentary on the triangulation between the human body's relationship with land and technology? And feel free to hop in and answer as you feel called to do.
This is Ezra speaking. Thanks for all the introductions and the questions. I'll just open with a very quick description of my Zoom screen. I'm a white, male presenting, masculine presenting, Ashkenazi, ASHKENAZI, Jewish, queer person. I have black curly hair that's slightly wet. I just showered about an hour ago, and some dark facial hair scruff on my face, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and my background is just a blurred out Zoom screen filter. To answer the question, I was thinking a lot about the ways in which relationships to land are through the body and spirit, and what happens through technology. But technology is also something that has been around forever, right? So if we're talking about technology, for me, it's also about the technology of tools, of community agreements, of ritual. To me, that is all technology. And so for me, I do see a history of the ways that there is so much rooted in ritual. And I'm coming, of course, from, which was shared in my bio, from a Jewish background, and I grew up with a lot of ritual, and so much of Judaism and Jewish culture is based off of experiences of the land or through natural materials. So every single holiday, every single ritual is based in a bodily ritual that is engaged through spirit and prayer and some physicality to engage the spirit. And so there is, for me, a big understanding of the ways that I think there is already this knowledge in so many of our different cultures, experience to what the human body's relationship with land and technology means. I also just want to point out that so much of the ways in which disability is also like created in a way where, I mean, like debilitation and further disability is really impacted by kind of misuse of technology, of bringing and stripping people of their connections to the land, and dehumanization of a lot of people, right? And so for me, this is tied to the ways in which eugenics, EUGENICS, is a kind of root for so much of kind of modern understanding of disability. And so much of eugenics is based on the idea that certain people's bodies, minds, spirit, religion, and relationship to land is superior to other people. And we know this from like the European context, and also the North American context, and how much of that is so much about the experimentation on Indigenous and Black and disabled and people from so many years, like going back to the 1800s, that so much of what we understand as like medicine right now is also related to all of that kind of like harmful, extremely harmful violence and disconnect from the land through kind of eugenicist technologies. And so much of modern technologies is based off of that. So those are sort of different through lines that I was interested in bringing up into this conversation. End of thought.
It's Carmen speaking. Thank you, Ezra, for opening up discussion. And I'll also give a description of myself. I'll say first that I'm calling in from the stolen and unsurrendered land of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Stolo people. I'm in what's known as the Renfrew Collingwood neighborhood in what's colonially known as Vancouver. I'm wearing a button shirt that's short sleeve, it's white, and it has butterflies on it and peace signs and different kinds of things like that. I'm also wearing a wool cap that's green. I have black over the ear headphones on. I am white with olive complexion that comes from my Greek and Italian ancestry. I have a black beard and black hair. Black hair, get from my mom, who's Greek. And yeah, I'm a non-visual artist. And I also have pain. I guess listening to Ezra and just listening to this question too, I'm glad you brought up, Ezra, this this topic of eugenics and how medicine is built around this like cure or overcoming. Our medical tech is around healing and maybe overcoming narratives around disability. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge now, right now, the Canadian government is trying to make access to, and is making access to, medical assisted death I guess more easier to access for people who are disabled. So Bill C-7 passed in 2021. This was the Medical Assistance in Dying Act. I think some of us are familiar, but it broadened the guidelines for where people could qualify for medical assisted death, and where disabled folks and mentally ill folks could qualify even when they're not at an end of life stage. So and when death was not imminent. So this means like you can more easily apply for and get medical assisted death than you can accessible housing or the accessibility related supports that you need. when I think of technology and disability culture, I'll use the word disability culture. Even, you know, we might call the kind of production that we're involved in, the kind of organizing community that we're involved in as having a culture, a disability culture. I think that we as disabled people living in a ableist world and that prioritizes certain, you know, presentation of the body, a certain capabilities of the body, we've had to develop our own tech in the form of accessibility and models for care that we have modeled with each other in order to survive. You know, I think this is expressed and articulated through activism, through community care, through mutual aid, but it, you know, it's where practices like the image, the visual description comes from, and you know, the various ways that we have found to communicate across embodiments, in, you know, across communities and languages. And I think this is our tech, like our techniques. I feel like it's in this, you know, we as a culture hold this epigenetic sort of, that's our will to to develop these our desires to develop these ways of being, I guess a more just like context to live in, and then sorry about that. That was my screen reader reading to me. And I forgot where I was at. Yeah, we have developed these ways to, I think we have this, you know, as a culture, we have this impulse to survive, and you know, this desire to survive and live in these worlds and futures that you know, work for us and that, you know, honor our ways of being. And I think our accessibility practices are part of that. Is that you know, the technology, the techniques that we have built to survive and live well under ableism. Yeah, and I guess, you know, I think about land and where I am right now in BC. I think about my friends who are surrounded by wildfires. My dear friend Sharona Franklin, who is in Merritt, BC, between two active wildfires. And I think about the fact that I have a blood condition that also is affected by smoke, is affected by barometric pressure, shifts in barometric pressure, and how like intimately connected to the environment I am because of my blood condition. Yeah, and I guess maybe like what I'm thinking about is, you know, an alternative to those cure tech, I guess, that comes from the medical establishment, or you know, the medical model. And I'm thinking of maybe new forms of accessibility and new technologies that like highlight our our various diverse ways of being in disability culture. So the non-normative, the atypical, the neurodivergent. Yeah, and I guess I'll just end it there. Thanks.
This is Jacqueline speaking. Thank you, Ezra and Carmen. Would Max or Pree like to participate in this question?
Hi there, this is Max speaking. I'm really honored to be here tonight. Just a brief description of me. I'm a white passing trans man. I have a goatee and a mustache and a little bit of scruff today. I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and there is a nondescript kind of beige wall behind me. So it's a very plain plain bunch of scenery, but a very appropriate topic and lots to say about it. So I think like I came of age in the 80s and 90s before the internet. And there was this idealism around technology, and it was also kind of like wiped clean of disability perspectives. And I think of my time in art school, and also how we were taught about well, I don't know if anyone's heard of Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, but it was sort of something that everybody used to dwell on almost ad nauseum. I think that I mean, that view of technology, certainly it was very idealistic, a bit naive, endlessly full of growth and that sort of thing. Technology was seen as something to play with. I think of the Dalmatian Macintosh computers back in the lab when they were brand new, and how they were this innovative thing that everybody liked to talk about and play with. I think of the software and how they always used to crash. I think of the early days of the internet when we used to just go on there and have fun, and how this has morphed into, sort of something a lot more sinister, in some ways. I think, we can say, things are changing, technology is shifting the artistic landscape. And I do think that disability art in particular has the opportunity or the capacity to complicate that in very exciting and sort of activism oriented ways. The threat of AI, for instance, the idea of stealing art and appropriating it, the concept of ableism, how that feeds into these ideas of, what we call uniform art, and even how AI processes that art, and the assumptions of what good art is or not, and how that relates to ableism. The training of AI, the co-option of images, of artistic pieces, the blended concerns of how technology affects the environment, how it's even become a symbol of pollution, and neoliberal agendas and dystopia now. And as far as historical commentary goes, concepts of how the body and biology blend or clash with technology, how disability can complicate that in exciting ways, because I really do see that as an extension of ableism, and a visual representation of that, and eugenics too, which folks have already brought up, which is really, really interesting. So I think we're at a very vulnerable time in history, and we aspire to regulate and harness that which is not seen. It can't be grounded in the body. It moves faster than the body, and it's assumed that all bodies process things in the same way, which is what these corporations and what neoliberal agendas do. They homogenize things. They try to turn it into regulations that then turn into profit. So it's really important and valuable to complicate and crypt those. And I just think that art is very susceptible to these forces and will shift. And perhaps what we perceive to be a threat in some ways, or what these corporations perceive to be a threat, could actually be an opportunity for forms of activism, for forms of exposing ableism, and compulsive able-bodiedness, compulsive able-mindedness, and all of that. So that's what I'll say as a starting point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Max. And I guess we'll give Pree the last word on this.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, everyone. I'll do a visual description of myself as well. I'm a brown-skinned transmasculine person with short curly hair and plastic glasses. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and, similar to Max, a very plain white wall behind me. And I don't know, some sort of 5 o'clock shadow coming in, and a earring that is noticeable on camera. In regards to the question, I first wanted to just share an access need that I forgot to mention earlier. It would be really helpful for me if Jacqueline, either you or somebody on the host team, if someone could put the question into the chat as well, just for auditory things, and just to follow along as the answers flow and develop. But awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I feel like the other three panelists touched on some really key points that were coming up for me as well. Like Ezra, what you shared around the land, spirituality and eugenics, of course. And then Carmen, what you were sharing around MAID being offered on a platter as opposed to affordable housing and the kind of state of affairs around that. And then Max, what you were sharing around the complexities of AI and this very weird time that we're in now. I wanted to connect everything we're talking about back to the exhibit in terms of how we as disabled artists interact with materials and are speaking to what's happening with, you know, the various pandemics that we're living through. And I think one of the artists' work that has spoken to me for many years, and I was really excited to see her work in this exhibit, is Ruth Cuthands and her visualization of different kinds of, I guess, germs or diseases or conditions under a petri dish, but using beading and using beads. And I feel like part of engaging with technology is thinking about different ways of interacting with it. And I think that the fact that Ruth took indigenous beading practices and was like, oh, I can use these beads that are, you know, usually used for embellishment or jewelry to depict something very scientific, something very literal, making it something very tactile as opposed to like a photograph or a scan. I think is really provocative and interesting. And I think it really speaks to that intersection that we're talking about of, you know, being, you know, humans, being artists, being disabled, and engaging with science and where it's at. So yeah, I can end there and throw it back over to Jacqueline.
Thanks so much, Pree. So moving forward, we decided it's probably best in terms of keeping everybody on track with time if we provide you each with 4 minutes to respond to a question. So Brittany will be giving you a 1-minute warning by putting up her hand or verbally saying it. We will also be taking Pree's advice to post the questions in the chat. So the next question is, what place, if any, do you feel disability and mad art creators hold in this conversation? Please share your thoughts on the assumption that we are returning to a pre-pandemic state of normalcy. Given the way that the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impacts disabled individuals, do you foresee this impacting artistic expression from disabled artists? And if anyone would like to participate right off the bat, you're welcome to do so.
This is Pree speaking. I think that disabled and mad, chronically ill artists and makers are, I think, some of the most important folks engaging in this conversation. I think similar to what we've already kind of been talking about, with COVID-19 being a mass eugenics, a mass disabling event, and then considering all of those social determinants of health. And, you know, when you tack on like class, folks who are racialized, folks who are Black and engaging in the healthcare system, all of those other identities, I think that disabled artists have some of the most important voices right now, especially as we continue to be pushed out to the margins. And especially as society as a whole is trying to, you know, go back to normal. We can see even right now with the current variant coming back into play. And yeah, it's it's a really tough time right now. Like similar to what Carmen was saying about having a condition that's so very specifically connected to the environment, I think is just, yeah, I think it makes everything that we have to say and everything that we're creating so much more important, because I think unlike a lot of able-bodied folks, we're kind of always self-aware of our mortality in a way that makes everything more heightened, more significant. Yeah, I can throw it over to whoever would like to go next.
Hi, this is Max speaking. I'll just jump off of that because I think, I think this is a very important time for disabled folks and disabled artists. I also believe that, the concept of stasis and things remaining the same always, even before the pandemic, I've always sensed, and I think it's because of my shifting, I have a mood disorder. And so things are always shifting and moving in my world. And I've always sort of had this feeling like this idea of trying to hold on to something that stays the same forever is an illusion. I mean, every day for me is like a new painting with different colors, different ways of being coming into play. And I've always sort of felt that the world and its inhabitants and its biology has always shifted and changed. It's just that human beings have had such a huge influence through things like fossil fuels and, just belief systems and ways of participating politically. So we've charted this evolutionary history through science and different institutions on Earth, but we also have to remember that these narratives are human-made. So for instance, when I grew up, like dinosaurs didn't have feathers, and now we've linked them to birds and we've reworked their appearances and based on scientific evidence. And these types of things continue as we learn more, but also as we shift. But these impacts of everything from global saturation, overpopulation, fossil fuels, and politics are changing biology, and humans are. And I think being someone who is dealing with a mental disability like I am, I mean, I'm very, very aware again of that relationship between my body and the environment and the fragility of that. We could talk about how capitalism and greed are fueling global warming, for example, and how these issues of necropolitics and MAID and the idea of assisted death all kind of fuse together in this very it's a very difficult time, and we're seeing real results of that now with the fires up north. Like, I'm from Yellowknife. I was raised and born there, and watching my hometown burn and seeing my friends have to leave, all of it, and then watching Kelowna, watching Maui, seeing all these points of fire, and it feels apocalyptic, and we really are reminded of how fragile we are and how our relationship to the environment is so dependent on our bodies. And I think with in the case of disability and disability art and folks who are disabled, we do have an ability to highlight that in ways that maybe folks who don't have to think about these things don't have. And I think that's the power of where we're standing right now, even though it is a very scary time as well. So thanks.
It's Carmen. Yeah, so disability art, I feel like too, it is super important right now because we bring a critical perspective to these topics. Part of our work is making and holding accessible space, and in that we think about the social, cultural, and political, and I think we try to address those within our making of accessible space. And so yes, I think we should get a lot of resources and opportunities to do more work, not just us here, but all of us within the intersections, within the, you know, broader disability community. Because I think, you know, I was even just having this conversation yesterday with my friend, a disabled organizer and theater producer in Vancouver, Mia Amir, and she was saying that we are already, you know, disabled folks already are living the future. You know, we are disproportionately impacted by whatever crisis is happening, and yeah, and I guess, you know, with COVID, yeah, I have to say, like, me and my community in Vancouver, you know, who are folks who are sick, chronically ill, are really worried, and have been, and throughout the, you know, the pandemic. And you know, we talk about this moment that we're in as a prolonged pandemic moment. We kind of still operate as if, you know, this, you know, we were in the pandemic, because we are. And you know, myself, I'm clinically extremely vulnerable. I was one of 200,000 BC residents who are labeled extremely vulnerable to COVID, and to all forms of COVID. And you know, I don't want to know what happens if I get COVID. And I'm lucky that I am in a community in Vancouver of folks who also feel the same. And I guess just in closing on this question, I just wanted to share about a project that is still going on in Vancouver called Masks for East Van. And they raise money to provide COVID supports and relief aid to folks in need in Vancouver, and masks, rapid tests, and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, support them if you can, because they are still they're doing some good work. Thanks.
This is Ezra speaking. Art is very limited in what it can do. I think the ways in which disabled artists understand that, from my experience and from understanding it from other people, is that we're doing it because we will always be doing art, right? We're artists. That's what we're called to. We're called to share and connect. And disability art is not going to save all of us from ableism, from the harms that are out there. And so it's really important to note that, like, the things that are sometimes thrust onto disabled artists, as in, you know, like, let's have these people speak about, like, they're the experts on XYZ. Like, sometimes we have understanding from our experiences and knowledge, and we also are trying to figure things out. And I think art is really the tool for figuring things out, and also for kind of putting a mirror up to what people's experiences are that are really common and normal, right? I think something that I always find a little bit, I find it funny, is that most people I know are mad or disabled or sick in some regard. And I'm not talking about in the ways only of, like, taking on the identity and politic of it, but, like, we are all living in a sick world, right? People were talking about all of the wildfires, how it's causing so many complications for all living beings, for our safety, for everyone. And I think that, you know, our artwork is going to be burning also, along with everything else. And so I bring this up to share that, you know, it's the same with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? We are lucky and privileged to be making art. And I think that, you know, speaks to kind of a sense of like a purpose of what art can do, which is like really uplift a spirit. And I think that that's never going to change for disabled artists. And I'm also very reticent to, you know, to say that disabled artists are the ones that have to make all the points around, you know, the change that needs to happen. And I'm saying this from a perspective of also making art that does actually like very directly talk about things that are issues that should change. But it's just important, I think, as like disability arts, you know, kind of like in a quotation as a phrase, is becoming more understood phenomenon within the larger arts field, is to also understand that like things that are kind of already being shared as disability art are also not like the end all be all of what disabled artists are making, right? And so I'm just sharing that because I want to make it so that it's open for pretty much like everyone to participate in what this so-called sense of disability arts is. And I think it's about like sharing what we know, and I'm gonna leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. It's Jacqueline speaking again. We'll move on to our third question now. Can you share a little bit about a BioCurious artwork that strongly impacted you or which you found significant? And I'll paste that in the chat as well.
This is Pree speaking. I feel like I already answered this question by accident, so I will pass on this one.
It's Max speaking. I was really taken with Blue by Laura Magnuson, just because the whole composition of it was really intriguing, and just I really put myself in her shoes, or in her wetsuit, I guess. I love the idea of immersing oneself physically in an environment, and I also really enjoyed. There's a bit of nonsense, like it just speaks so much to the chaos, at least it did to me, of the times we're living in. It also, you know, the idea of wearing a parka underwater and submerging oneself in the environment, making art in the environment literally is commentary. And I mean, selfishly, you know, being someone who really likes to work with, you know, the body physically in environments and responses to those. I was really almost just as taken with the idea of the process behind that. It got me thinking a lot about, you know, the environment, concepts around, you know, how to navigate, you know, making work thoughtfully. So I guess that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But thank you.
This is Ezra speaking. I really loved this work called Sapa Juji Protector by Siku Alulu. And what I loved about this chest piece with this beaded chest piece that is worn like as a protective garment, and it's also related to the way spirit is imbued through material, through natural material, through kind of thinking about the land as this thing you can cloak upon yourself and be protected. And And I think what I loved about that is it made me think a lot about how that goes both ways, right? So we are also cloaking the land and the earth with our bodies and minds and spirit, and I think we owe that to the land and to the earth, to have our protection through that kind of like material understanding, but also to give back in that same way. And I love this connection, from totally different cultural perspective. There's a Jewish mystical lore about a creature or a homunculus called the golem. And the idea is that from the earth, from mud, from clay, through speaking certain prayers and different iterations of God's names, etc., that you can bring to life a creature for protection through the earth, right? So it's imbuing the earth with some kind of like spirit connection to take on protection. And this all came about as kind of a lore for the ways in which these were created for protection of Jewish communities in persecution. So just to share, I find this to be really fascinating artwork, and I loved that I got to understand from my perspective, but also the ways that it makes us really relate to our role in also being protectors for the earth and the land. End of thought.
It's Carmen speaking. So I read this question as BioCurious as a category of art. I know this is a bit silly since the exhibition is titled this, but I'll just share kind of what came to mind. Some of the practices of some of friends like Sharona Franklin, who I mentioned earlier, Moira Williams too, who is a Indigenous artist who makes a lot of work that speaks to this theme. I also promised my brother, who I'm collaborating with on a project too, that I'd share about our BioCurious artwork that we're working on right now. So my brother, we share the same visual condition, but not the same pain condition. Both are hereditary. And I carry both. My sister has one and my brother has the other. And my brother, for the last 4 years, he has been my caregiver grower for medical cannabis through the Access to Cannabis Regulations program through Health Canada. And I use cannabis for pain. This is after years and years of being on heavy narcotics because of my pain, and also before my hip replacements, and it has been a really positive, I guess, transition for me. In sampling the various kind of varieties that my brother grows, I've learned that there are certain strains that actually activate my visual hallucinations. So with my visual condition, I have what's called Charles Bonnet syndrome, and these are just like very vibrant and animated visual hallucinations that take shapes and all sorts of colors. They're shimmery. I'm experiencing them now. They're very colorful, and I quite enjoy them. And so what my brother and I are working on right now is developing a variety of cannabis that is meant to like activate my visual hallucinations. And there are some that we have already grown that have had that effect on me, and some others with similar visual conditions as well. So what our project is called Impaired, and we're kind of showing some of the outcomes of our collaboration over the last few years, including the kind of accessibility adaptations that he has made to make the grow room and his systems accessible to him as someone with vision loss as well. And that's where I'll leave it. Check.
All right, fantastic. I think we're ready to move on to our next question, which, depending on how time goes, may be our last. The question is, can you share how you take up critical access in your artistic practice, if at all?
This is Ezra speaking. I have been working with different objects of disability culture and experience for a bit now. One of them in particular being a magic wand massager, which is, can be used for pain relief massage, but also is, I think, more commonly known and maybe used for sexual pleasure as a sex toy. So I've been working with that object in a few different iterations of sculptures over the years. And what I love about it is that it provides a different way of engaging in an art space with an artwork, because anytime it's there, I do offer it to be used in the space, right? So if someone is there and is like, I'm having some pain, they can, take the magic wand and use it. But also there is a sound element, there's vibration, so it's very tactile. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about in general, is what the tactile, like a kind of multimodal experience of engaging with art is. And I've also been doing some rug making, some textile art. So that's also meant to be touched and engaged with in art spaces, that often also has kind of a related text to it as it relates to a conceptual project. And so I think that has come out of a lot of work from different blind artists and deafblind artists who have shared a lot of understanding for touch being a knowledge maker. And I'm thinking in specific of a deafblind writer, John Lee Clark, who has really, from a few years back already, made me reconsider how I am thinking about like what engagement means for presenting in an art space. End of thought.
Hi, this is Max speaking. So I guess I'm always trying to deconstruct what I learned in art school during the 90s and early 2000s through a disability art or disability justice oriented lens. Concepts of able-bodiedness, able-mindedness, or compulsory able-bodiedness and able-mindedness, white supremacy, colonialism, Eurocentricity. I think that the art world in general needs to question itself more ideologically, and I really feel that inserting a disability justice angle into my art practice, namely through engaging with my concepts of madness, which when I was in art school, I felt like I wasn't really allowed to talk about that. And I find it in these types of environments where we can openly discuss through disability narratives, I can embrace that and use it to my advantage and play with these concepts and complicate things. Like Crip Time, for example, can innovate how we approach concepts of productivity as artists. We can question this need to constantly produce. We can stand back, slow the clock, slow time. We can value our lives as lived lives rather than only for their productive merit and how they relate in relation to art making. I also like the idea of curating new ways of supporting artists. and their lives and creations. So, I mean, those are all just very vague, kind of general ways of complicating things. And I think, like, I've spent most of my time writing my dissertation, but getting back into it, I plan to continue to explore those themes. So that's the end of my thought. Thanks.
Hi, Carmen again. So critical access, I think this term, there's many terms, I think that, sorry, my screen reader's announcing something. There's a few terms that have emerged, like specifically through disability art and create, this space of disability art, or terms like creative access or access aesthetics, or access art, which is a term proposed by the Portland Curiosity Paradox. These all describe accessibility as like an action, I think, as something that goes beyond compliance level measures, that accounts for the living, and the being, I think, and what needs to change. So, and in 2015, I guess I was thinking about accessibility a lot, and I wanted to describe accessibility beyond compliance level kind of measures and kind of these legal frameworks. And I wrote this short piece called Open Access, and it was just 5 short paragraphs on like kind of accessibility as I understood it, or actually what I wanted it to be. And really, it being a more like an ongoing process that is like guided by community needs, it being something that can address the disabling conditions, so more like kind of systemic kind of causes for these barriers to participation or experience that we encounter in an ableist culture. And since then I've tried to, I think, really approach accessibility in a way that's in line with like a more living model for accessibility, where people can kind of identify their own subjective access needs, and we kind of like, this term, access ecology is also, I think that term to me makes a lot of sense. And I think, my hope is that we can really kind of make spaces where we can kind of, like honor our, the embodiments, the identities, the realities, and learning styles of disability culture. And yeah, critical access, I guess that's most of what I was thinking. I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Okay, we will have time for our final question, unless anyone has any other thoughts on that they'd like to share first. No? Okay. So our last question then. The BioCurious exhibit is accompanied by QZM URL. This digital rendering of the exhibit uses technology to create an accessible online experience of the exhibit. Moving forward, how do you see the landscape of the arts evolving as technology continues to develop and increasingly alters the ways we interact with the concept of accessibility?
Hi everyone, I'm back. This is Pree speaking. I'm hoping and envisioning that it creates more opportunities for folks to interact with art at home, without it being extremely flat. I think for a long time, it looked like images of artworks that were in a gallery space, but online through a web page. And I think that this Qzium, I've never used Qzium before, but I actually found it definitely like a few steps beyond that. And I found it really engaging, and I liked how it remembers where you are. If you open the URL again, if you open the URL again, and I like that it kind of gives the effect of like getting a gallery tour. But something I'm thinking about specifically is Tangled Disability Arts in Toronto, here on Treaty 13 territory. They have a like an iPad robot. I think her name is Peggy. And basically you can schedule tours with Peggy, and either the robot, it's like on a stand with wheels, and it'll either take you, like you can interact with it over Zoom from home, and it'll take you throughout whatever exhibit is on at that specific time. Or you can schedule a tour with Peggy and a Tangled staff member. And I think those kinds of interactive, kind of like hybrid, like someone is still showing you the exhibit, but you're at home. Like I'd like to see more of that, and I hope that there will be more of that, especially with seeing a lot of kind of like commonplace access accommodations that came into place during early COVID lockdown era, where, you know, suddenly all your doctor's appointments were possible to do over the phone, and everybody's job was possible to do from home. I'd like to see more of those kinds of accessible interactions coming into play. End of thought.
This is Ezra speaking. I think that what Pree mentioned is awesome, and I love that Tangled is doing that. I also want and think there's space for the tactile within all of that as well. Like something I was mentioning just through my artwork, but also then thinking about it through kind of exhibition making or programming, is how to engage people with something to hold, to feel, to touch in a kind of remote way, right? So thinking about like, what is that experience that Pree was just outlining of, like, you know, zooming in to an exhibition, or viewing the BioCurious exhibit online. Like, what if at home there were kits you could order in advance, right? And they had some of the beads that were used in some of, or, you know, maybe not those specific beads, but general beads, or something that gives another way in, that I think is both like an access point, but I also think, like, when we're talking about art, so much of it is highly material, but yet, and this is like, you know, not just around disability, but I think, you know, there's so many things in museums and galleries that says do not touch, but I think it really leaves out so much of what our experiences as embodied people. So that's where I'm thinking that technology can move forward, is also like bringing the humanness back into the kind of experience of remote engagement. End of thought.
If I can jump back in, Ezra, thanks for reminding me of that. I got to work on a really, really cool project called Transforming Grief that is currently up at the Fort York Visitor Center here in Toronto. And I'll put some links to it in the chat shortly after. But because that was it was an exhibit that was for the Toronto History Museums. And so the access component of it was funded really generously. And so we actually got to work with, we being artists that were in the exhibit, and the lead artists like myself, we got to work with an access, I guess, like I would call them like an access agency that generally does the access for shows at the MoMA in the States. And I got to learn and see some really cool things coming into play to create the exhibit, to make the exhibit accessible for low vision and blind folks. And a big part of that was the tactile pieces. So some of the paintings in the show that are done by Gloria C. Swain are actually tactile paintings. So again, that's not something that you could necessarily like access in a very literal way from home. But I really like Ezra's ideas of like kits that you could pre-schedule and receive, but you can actually run your hands all over the paintings. And I think that that really disrupts the kind of white supremacist ideas of like what you're supposed to do in an art gallery and how you're supposed to engage with work. And the project that I was leading is called the Chrysalis, which is a huge textile structure that you're kind of able to encompass yourself within. And one of the really fun parts of the project was that I got to make a replica of it that was, I don't know, maybe 1/16 scale. And the patches on the actual textile structure, I would say range from about, I don't know, maybe 2 to 5 feet in length. And so on the miniature replica that I made that folks can actually touch and feel and scrunch up, I would say those patches are probably about 2 inches, 2 to 5 inches, as opposed to 2 to 5 feet. But yeah, replicas and tactile objects are something that I'm starting to see more of, and I want to do more of that. I'm currently working on a really cool project for the Textile Museum, where the same collective that the ad hoc collective that I put together for that previous project, they've commissioned us to actually create textile replicas for a show that is coming to Toronto it has really old works that they can't make them tactile. So they've commissioned us to actually create the tactile replicas of them so that when folks come into the Textile Museum, they'll be able to touch something that is an interpretation of the pieces that are on the wall and that are from, 50 years ago. But yeah, I just wanted to flag that, yeah, not everything digital, tactile is also really important, and that in-person engagement. I also was thinking about what Grunt Gallery does over out west, where they have low sensory hours so that autistic folks and other folks that experience like overstimulation can attend the gallery. And during the low sensory hours, any kind of video installations, the volume is turned off. They ask that folks kind of not speak during that time. Staff will not come up to you and engage with you or bother you. I guess like interrupt you or ask you for things. Yeah, and I'm not sure entirely how that fits into this conversation of technology, but I think that turning the technology down for some folks is really important too. I know for myself, as someone who's autistic, I get really, really overstimulated very quickly. And as much as I want to engage in shows that also have olfactory elements and there's smells and there's this and there's that, I find that it can be a lot for my nervous system. And yeah, I think the last piece that I'll say actually is also, I'm starting to see a lot of kind of community art spaces and also some gallery spaces really intentionally curate quiet rooms or low sensory rooms where you can kind of step away to take a break and kind of recalibrate yourself as well. And one of the spaces that I'm thinking of, they had like the four traditional medicines. There was like a little water fountain machine and water sounds and these rock-shaped and pebble-shaped cushions that you could come sit on. But yeah, that's my final thought. And thank you again to Ezra for bringing up some of those points for me.
Hi, Carmen here. I love the Tangled monopod tours, the little robot. I worked on a show with Tangled called Undeliverable, I think in 2021, and we had those tours. I think it might have been one of the first times they did it, but I don't think it was like robotic yet. I think it was just hosted by a gallery attendant, and I felt like it was such a good way to tour a show remotely. It was like there was feedback between the viewer and the person showing the work, and you really felt hosted in a in like a really welcoming sort of way, where like access needs were kind of you know, part of the conversation about like, how do you want to view this work? And there's options. You know, and yeah, I thought that worked really well. I also wanted to just point to a project that just because all this talk about tactility, I worked on this project called Let's Keep in Touch with this curator, Whitney Mashburn, since 2016. And we actually had a show at Grunt Gallery. It was the first, it was like all tactile. It was called Project Fireflower, and it was a collaboration with a blind pyrotechnician and conceptual artist in Vancouver named Colin Van Uchelen. That's U-C-H U-C-H-E-L-E-N? I'm not sure, I'm sorry. But yeah, and everything in the show was touchable, and there was some offerings where you could listen to things too. And I think the tactile offerings, that when they're done well, you know, I do enjoy them, but I always do want to touch the actual object and not a replica usually, although I do understand those, like, you know, material samples, replicas, as entry points, as points into the work. So they are great. But one show that I think really did this tactile offerings well was called In Plain Sight. And this is what at the Wellcome collection in London. It's Wellcome. And me and Whitney produced a work for that show with Georgina Klieg, K-L-E-E-G-E, and Fayan Devi, D''E-V-I-E. And we made a work called Modes of Touch. And Fayan and Georgina and their collaborator, Katie West, produced handling scores for 3 objects that were held in a kind of art historical, like museological display. So it was a cabinet with 3 drawers, each with one work in them. And the visitor could request a key and open the drawer and hold the work. And then the handling scores by Georgina, Fayan, and Katie would guide them in their interaction with the work. And I think there's still material on the site from Modes of Touch in the In Plain Sight exhibition. But there were so many different like methods for like non-visual wayfinding in that show as well, where there's like this little groove I could put my cane into that took me to the various stops in the show. And it actually worked really well. I'm usually skeptical of those kinds of things, but I felt like it really improved my like sense of agency within the space. Yeah. And that's where I'll leave it. Thanks.
Hi, this is Max speaking. Everybody has said everything that I've already pretty much marked down. So I'll just add that, you know, there's sort of an interesting friction between, you know, using the machine for excess and then the element of dissociation that I find sometimes occurs when I'm using machines for too long and get overstimulated by them. And I think, you know, around issues of curation, certainly at Tangled, I was the curator in residence there, and I'm still there, just wrapping it up. But the robot has been such an innovative tool for folks who want to tour, and I think it has really opened up a huge dialogue about curation, ways of curating shows in new ways of relating sensorily, ways of expanding the senses or even reducing the senses. There's just a lot to talk about, but I think everyone has covered the bases so well here. So I'm not going to add much more. Thanks.
Well, thank you everyone for responding to those questions. I'm going to pass the mic off to Darren now, who's going to present a couple of questions that we got from our audience.
Hi everyone, my name is Darren and I work in the School of Disability Studies at TNU. I'm a white person with a brown beard and blonde hair, and I'm in my living room with some white walls behind me. So it is 7:18 and there are some great questions in the Q&A, but I think I might just ask one so we can kind of get into it. And then we'll wrap up in just under 10 minutes, so we have some closing remarks. Some noise outside my house, just one moment. Okay, so the question I'm going to ask is from an anonymous question. As artists, liberation seekers, and educators, how do you care for yourself? How do you center joy? And I'll put that in the chat. So we'll just take this one question before the end of the panel.
This is Pree speaking. I love this question so much. I responded to this just saying that I loved it. And I love it because it's literally about centering joy, which I think doesn't happen often enough. And yeah, and to answer the question, I think part of it comes really easy for me. Like I mentioned, I'm autistic and I feel really like particular kinds of affinities to certain things that other folks don't. And I think, remember last year when there was a lot of memes about going outside and touching grass? Like that was something that I had been doing for many years already, where I would just like try to find a patch of grass, it's so hard to find in like Metropolitan, like proper downtown Toronto. But yeah, just like taking off my shoes and my socks and like actually feeling the earth. And sometimes just that was enough to like really make me feel better. I think on a larger scale, I'm really fortunate to have full-time permanent employment. And to be honest, like when talking about trying to survive in capitalism, being able to have that while also maintaining an arts practice is something that really helps my mental health. Because when I was like an artist within the gig economy and constantly concerned about, you know, when is that invoice going to be paid? When is, you know, the following month's rent? Where's that coming from? Where's this coming from? Was very, very stressful. And so just having that stability is actually really helpful for me to be able to center moments of joy and to spend resources on things that just make me really happy. I think another thing that again is unfortunately connected to money is a lot of body work. I find that doing a lot of different kind of body work really helps me as someone who I have a lot of chronic illnesses. I'm a cancer survivor. I also have a lot of chronic pain. And so, yeah, something that really, really helps me a lot is just like ongoing circuits of body work, like chiro and registered massage therapy, physio, spending time in bodies of water, usually my bathtub, but that's something that brings me a lot of joy. Last year for my birthday, I'm 31, but my sibling bought me like bathtub crayons and a bubble machine to attach to my bathtub faucet. Because of my fibromyalgia, I take a lot of Epsom salt soaks, and so they bought me lots of bathtub toys. So small things like that bring me a lot of joy. And also just like fostering connection with people that really energize me rather than kind of deplete my energy is something that, yeah, brings me a lot of joy as well. There's something noisy happening around me, so I can pass it over to somebody else.
Hi, Max speaking. This is a really wonderful question. I think as someone who suffers from bipolar depression, mood disorder, and all of that, I find that I'm often overwhelmed by the world. My senses are flooded almost always. So what I like to do is break things down into very small tasks. And that includes taking time out just to breathe and take care of myself. Simple things like going for walks. Like I think that there's sort of this in the culture we live in, there's sort of this need for these big, expansive things, lavish experiences around self-care and such. And for me, it's just as simple as putting one foot in front of the other, breaking things down, having a shower, doing simple tasks, enjoying my food and taking the time to savor it, just slowing things down. It's simple and it's profound. And I also really am careful with, I guess, how much stuff I have in my environment, because there's also this compulsion to constantly spend money, constantly do, and something simple like a nice meal, which I can either make at home or just simple things. Just reminding myself that I don't have to give in to the voices outside of myself, and simple things like getting out of the house, going for a walk and the like are ways of rejuvenating my spirit, I guess, and also taking joy in my routines, which as a neurodivergent person, I very much do. So I'll leave it there, and that's the end of my thought. Thank you.
Hey, Carmen here. Yeah, on Joy, I love spending time with and playing with my almost 5-year-old daughter Pearl. I mean, that's where I have the most fun, I think. I have a lot of fun doing some of my projects. Performances. Sometimes when I'm performing, I feel the most myself. I also like just like for me, kind of walks at night or like non-visual learning experiences that I do on my own. I feel like I'm the most in my body on a quiet evening when I'm walking on my own and just listening and feeling with my cane. I love warm and use my infrared heating pad all the time and every day. I love water. I like feeling weightless in water and feeling like I can move move with little strain of my body and in the water. I think the play that I do with Pearl really gives me a lot of joy. And I also I need to center myself with people who are similarly aligned and like share a similar worldview and politics and understanding around disability. I have to take walks and set boundaries around work. I I use cannabis a lot. I use psilocybin, and just like feelings of closeness and comfort, and when I need it, and I need to turn my brain off sometimes. So I dedicate time to that where I'm not thinking about anything. And I'll leave it there.
This is Ezra speaking. I think everyone has shared some really awesome insights into the myriad of ways to access a little bit of joy in overwhelmingly depressive world that I live in my mind and body, but also I think we all do. And my dog is so soft and velvety, and that is like where I find the most joy, taking walks with my dog, seeing him play, sniff. I think softness and like caretaking is a space of joy for me through my dog, who is part of my life from a couple of weeks before the lockdown of the pandemic in 2020, in which I adopted him right after a dear friend's funeral. So thinking a lot about the relationship between grief and joy is actually really important, because I think for me, that's how I also relate to it, is like I'm in grief, right? We move through grief. It doesn't really go away in this world. And where is the joy within the grief? And also, like, there is grief in certain joys as well. And I like to keep things a little bit blurry like that. So that's my thought. And also cannabis and TV, turning my mind off through that as well, and finding joy in collaboration with other friends and my brother Noah. And that's, yeah, and having community like this is really great. I'm very appreciative to be here and to share this with you all. End of thought.
Thanks everyone for your great answers to that question and the whole evening. I'll pass it over to Jacqueline for some closing remarks. Thank you.
This is Jacqueline. Thank you, Darren. So thank you so much, everyone, for your ideas, thoughts, insight. We hope the conversation can continue informally. A recording of the talk will be uploaded to our school's website at a later date. There are many people who helped bring this event together. We would like to acknowledge the financial support from the Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Grant, which supported the work of students and artists in putting together this panel. Thank you as well to those who spoke this evening, Carmen, Pree, Max, and Ezra. We appreciate their thoughtful contributions. Our Access staff have been working hard throughout this event. Lisa and Daniel, the ASL interpreters, and Angie, our live captioner, thank you for your help. As well, the project team has been working hard over the past few weeks to pull together dozens of small details and ensure that everything runs smoothly. We want to acknowledge the work of Rob Colgate, Darren Creech, and Esther Ignani, and of course, our media technician, Luke Nader. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope you enjoyed the panel as much as we did. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, and we have also posted the document containing the artists' bios in the chat for you to access.